of our two tip workshops. This is part one, as I was just saying. My name is Beth Giannini. I'm the Transportation Program Manager at the Franklin Regional Council of Governments. I'm joined by my colleague, Lori Scarborough. She is our Senior Transportation Planning Engineer. I also want to just do a quick shout out to Amanda Doster, who really helped us to do all the behind the scenes pulling this workshop together. We couldn't have really done it without her, so I would just want to thank Amanda. And so this, as I said, this is the first of two parts of a workshop on the Transportation Improvement Program. And I know a lot of you already know what the Transportation Improvement Program is, but in case you don't, it's a prioritized listing of transportation improvement projects. And we do one for our region, and basically all of the regional planning agencies in Massachusetts do a tip listing for their region. And any projects that are receiving federal transportation funds must be listed on the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. And Lori's going to get much more in detail to the context and kind of talk more about what the TIP is and how it fits into what we do here as a planning agency. And I just wanted to mention kind of how this came about. This is something that we're really pleased to be providing. It was some information that came up in our Franklin County administrators group that meets quarterly, and it was something that they had questions about and really wanted to had interest in delving deeper into what the Transportation Improvement Program is and kind of learn and provide some information. So we thought it would be helpful to hold a two-part series. As I was saying, this is the first part, which is kind of being presented by the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, and we're providing an overview of the Transportation Improvement Program in terms of what we do and how it fits in and how it fits into our regional planning. The second part of this series, which will be happening on February 14th, we do, even though it's a virtual meeting, we are also providing a snow date, which we will keep until we're absolutely sure we're using the 14th as our date. We have a snow date in case we do get snow. We know that a lot of the highway supers who want to join us, it's always difficult, even if the snow is occurring or has occurred the day before. We want to make sure that anyone who wants to join can join. So the second date is on the 14th, and on that date, the topic will be more of a closer look of actual project development, and the presentations on the 14th will be done by the district offices of MassDOT, and they'll provide more information on the project development process. So let's see, just a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'm going to turn the presentation over to Lori. We really want to encourage questions. So if you have questions, you can either feel free to type your questions into the chat, and I'll be keeping tabs on the chat, and I can ask the questions when we're going to take intermittent breaks throughout the presentation, and allow for questions at different points to kind of break up the presentation a little bit. So you can either type your questions into the chat, or when we pause to ask questions, feel free to use the hand raising icon and signal to us that you would like to unmute and ask the question, and we'll just call on folks to ask their questions. So so that is how we'll go. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for questions also. So please do ask questions. We really want to have a conversation where we get questions. And let's see, finally, I know that everyone had to sign up for the workshop. So we have a listing of who signed up and who's online. But if for some reason you're joining somebody else, sitting in the room joining somebody else, and you didn't sign up, but you want to be added to our kind of listing of who was at this meeting for any further information that should get sent out, please go ahead and just write your contact information into the chat. And I'm just double checking to make sure. I think I've covered all of our housekeeping. So at this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Lori for her presentation. And thanks again for joining us.
Great, thanks, Beth. Yeah, as I said, I am Lori Scarborough. I'm the Senior Transportation Planning Engineer here at the FERCOG. And I work very closely with Beth and with our MassDOT partners on developing the Transportation Improvement Program each year. Actually, a little bit more background on me. Before I came to the COG, I worked at MassDOT District 2 in the project section for several years. And so I have a little bit of insight into this process, sort of from both the planning agency side and the MassDOT side. So it's just a little bit about my background. We have a brief agenda here. I'm going to try and keep this to about an hour, maybe go through the whole hour and a half time, but I think we can keep it contained. So we're here at the introduction, and then I'm going to briefly go over the planning framework, sort of the background of what the TIP is, part of a larger planning environment, then into how the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, is developed in our region, and then get into an overview of municipal TIP project development, how to initiate, initiate a municipal project for the TIP, and then we'll move on to discussion. My goal, what I really would like, is for this not to just be me presenting you with information, but to be much more of a knowledge exchange, because I know our different colleagues in the different towns in Franklin County have different levels of experience with TIP projects. Some are right in the middle of them. Some of you have shepherded projects from start through the TIP multiple times, and some of you have never touched it. So there's a lot of different levels of experience, and it would be great for this to be a forum for y'all to share your information and questions and concerns about the TIP process and how it all works. So as we get through each section, there's a few slides, maybe 4 slides in each section, and then we'll stop for questions as we go. But the bulk we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, for a more in-depth discussion at the end. So yeah, so let's dive in. Before I get into what the TIP itself, I'm going to give a little bit more of the framework. I want to give some background about the planning framework, of which the TIP is just one part, because I just feel like the more we know and understand about how something is created and why it's created, the reasons and the methods behind something, the more comfortable we are working with it, and it's not a mystery anymore. It's not just like, well, the TIP, I don't know what that is or why, or why do we have to go through all this? I'm going to give a little bit of background about the who, what, when, and why. So that starts with the program of transportation planning and funding in the United States. The TIP is just one aspect of the federal transportation planning and funding system. Our Congress passes infrastructure legislation and allocates funds to support that infrastructure, and that is dispersed to several agencies. Transportation funds go to the U.S. Department of Transportation, which has several administrations within it, including the Federal Highway Administration, the FHWA, and the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA. Those are really the two administrations of USDOT that interact with the TIP, and so we're going to focus on those. There are other, there's Federal Aviation Administration and the Federal Rail Administration that are very involved with aviation and rail projects, which are transportation projects, but they don't really impact the TIP, and certainly not our regional TIP. So we're not going to get too much more on that. So DOT and Federal Highway make the rules for implementing or applying the funds that have been allocated by our infrastructure legislation. The current infrastructure legislation is the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that was passed, I believe, at the end of 2020 and is in place now. And that actually includes a pretty significant increase in federal funding available for transportation projects, which is great, but it also means there's a lot of work and a lot of moving pieces in a lot of different programs. As I said, the TIP is just one. So Federal Highway makes the rules of how transportation planning and construction funds can be spent, and disperses those funds to the state. In our state, Massachusetts, MassDOT administers those funds in several categories. There are formula funds that are a portion of those are allocated to sort of statewide transportation needs and sort of ongoing system maintenance. And then a portion of those funds are dispersed to the regional planning agencies in Massachusetts. So at MassDOT, there are two main offices that we work with. One is the Office of Transportation Planning in Boston, and they handle the planning aspects. And then the Highway Division handles sort of the implementation, the construction, and the operations of our transportation network in Massachusetts, of our road transportation network in Massachusetts. And the Highway Division has an office in Boston, and then they have the district offices. And our region in Franklin County intersects with two MassDOT Highway Division districts. District 1, sort of the western part of Franklin County, and District 2, sort of the eastern part of Franklin County. So they administer the funds, they sort of interpret the rules and make the rules for how these funds are applied in Massachusetts. And they also sort of lead all the overarching planning efforts that sort of guide the directions that the transportation ship travels in. And this is all part of a planning framework called 3C planning, which is 3C. The 3 C's are continuing, comprehensive, and cooperative. This was a continuing planning effort. It's not just a one and done. Federal Highway makes a plan, we implement it, and then we never think or talk about transportation planning ever again. It's ongoing, it's comprehensive, it covers all aspects of transportation projects and transportation issues. So that's sort of, there's planning involved and not just, reactive construction projects. And it's cooperative. It's not just rules coming down from above, Federal Highway telling MassDOT what to do and MassDOT telling the regions what to do and the regions telling the towns what to do. It's intended to be an interactive and cooperative process. And so Massachusetts is divided into 3 regional planning agencies, which our different regions have different transportation needs and sort of different priorities. And so Franklin County is one of those 13 regions. And actually, as you see in this little map here, Franklin is the largest Black region, but there are 2 others down by the Cape. There's Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. These are Black because they are rural regions. So part of the 3C planning rules is that metropolitan regions are required by federal regulations to conduct the 3C planning process for everything, all the work that they do that is funded by federal funds. But so that actually applies to metropolitan areas as, sort of determined by the census. And that left a few regions of Massachusetts that don't meet those metropolitan definitions. And so MassDOT, when this sort of framework was set in place, sort of the late 80s, early 90s, I believe, decided that those rural regions would also be participating as part of this comprehensive and cooperative planning process, and so that they wouldn't be left out. They would still be eligible and able to fully participate in the planning activities and the construction funding that was available. And so that's so the other 10 regions of the state have metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs. You'll see that in a lot of MassDOT's materials, and you may hear me mention MPOs, but Franklin County, as well as Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, are not metropolitan, so we're not an MPO, we are a TPO, but we serve the exact same function for our region of guiding the regional aspect of transportation planning and construction funding in the state. So the MPO actually, so the RPAs are the staff to the MPO. We do the day-to-day work, the full-time work, and the MPOs, they represent the public. So they're like an elected and appointed, some members elected, some members appointed body that represents the public in approving, endorsing, and guiding the priorities of the regional planning for each region. So as I said, in Franklin County, we're a transportation planning organization, the FCTPO, or the TPO, I call it a lot. So just to briefly get into the makeup of the TPO, the FCTPO, there are 9 members, as is the case with each MPO and TPO in the state. 2 of those members are the Secretary of MassDOT, who serves as the chair of the FCTPO, and the administrator of the MassDOT Highway Division. Now, these folks are busy people who work in Boston, and they usually don't actually attend our TPO meetings, but they each send a designee, one from the Office of Transportation Planning and one from the Highway Division. But maybe someday we'll be lucky enough to have the secretary at one of our TPO meetings. The rest of the membership are regional and local appointed or elected officials, including the chair of the Franklin Regional Council of Governments Executive Committee, the chair of the Franklin Regional Transit Authority, a regionally elected official of the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, the mayor of Greenfield, and 3 Franklin County sub-regional appointments. You see this little map shows the different regions of Franklin County, with Greenfield highlighted in the middle. In any MPO that contains cities with elected mayors, each mayor is typically a member of that MPO or TPO. In our region, there is one elected mayor in Greenfield, and so that's why they sort of seem like they're highlighted there. But so the other regions each have their own representative, who is typically a town administrator that is appointed by the FERCOG Council. So the TPO, I'm sorry, just quickly go back. The TPO meets monthly as needed to review and endorse the planning documents that are required by the 3C policies, and also to sort of just learn and exchange information on the issues of transportation locally and statewide, sort of just be informed of the current practices of the FERCOG and MassDOT. So that planning work that is done by MassDOT and FERCOG as an RPA includes several plans that are federally mandated and that we work on in different capacities throughout the year. Some of them. So I'll just quickly go through. Actually, I start with the statewide plans, and then they each have, some of them have regional corollary. So MassDOT guides the statewide plans. The Office of Transportation Planning develops the long-range transportation plan, which is a 20-year long-range plan. They're currently developing the latest update to that, Beyond Mobility, and they're actually taking input and comments on your concerns about this sort of the direction of statewide transportation planning in the Beyond Mobility study. MassDOT also develops a capital investment plan. This is actually not a 3C plan, but it is a plan that the state uses to show all federal and state transportation projects, so all projects that are going to be receiving state or federal transportation funds in the next 5 years. This is renewed annually, and it includes any projects that are listed in the state transportation improvement program. So each region develops a TIP, and all 13 TIPs are compiled into the state transportation improvement program, along with MBTA and regional transit agency projects. So those all get compiled into the STIP, and then the STIP is one part of the capital investment plan, which also includes investments of non-federal state funds. On the regional side, we have four endorsed plans that are approved as needed by the FCTPO. The first is sort of our guiding document, is our public participation plan, and this lays out the work that we're do for public outreach, how that outreach and coordination with public participation is conducted. And our public participation plan, our PPP, is very similar to others around the state. All of the documents except the PPP itself, all of the documents that are endorsed, that need to be endorsed by the FCTPO, get reviewed by the TPO and then released for a public comment period. And the public has the opportunity to review all these documents thoroughly, then provide comments, and then after 21 days, relevant comments are addressed and hopefully incorporated into the document that's being reviewed. And so that 21-day period is outlined in our public participation plan. We also have a regional transportation plan, which is a regional level version of the state long range transportation plan, and that is also renewed every 4 years. And we are also currently deeply involved in the public outreach portion of developing the latest update to the Franklin County Regional Transportation Plan. So I'm sure as town representatives, you've been contacted about several of the public meetings, outreach meetings that we are conducting on the RTP. So please take advantage of those and share any comments that you have or concerns about transportation planning in Franklin County looking over the next 20 years. We also have a unified planning work program. So this is updated annually, and this is a program of all the planning work that the FERCOG is going to do for the next year. Some of these are ongoing things, such as developing the TIP. We do this every year, sort of constantly, and some of them are one-off sort of projects or plans, or maybe something that we do once every 3 years. And so that's a lot of our pedestrian planning or rail planning, safety studies, just a lot of various work, and that is also available for public comment every year when it is renewed, and it's another opportunity if you have concerns that maybe could be addressed by a planning study, reach out to us, and we'll see if it's something that we could present to the FCTPO and include in the Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. And finally, we have the Transportation Improvement Program. It's the meat of what we're here to talk about. So the TIP is a 5-year plan, but it is updated annually, and it is a plan that lists all of the projects in Franklin County that are intended to receive federal transportation funding over the next 5 years in annual elements. It has a highway section and a transit section. We're going to focus almost entirely on the highway section today. The transit section is developed a little bit differently by the FRTA, and I'd be happy to answer questions about that as if anyone has them. But as I said, our discussion is going to focus on the highway program. So actually that brings me to the end of this section. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to. Are there any questions yet? Or we can move on to development. All right. Okay, so let's get a bit into this. So now let's get into the TIP itself. It is a lot more than just a list of projects that I get on. It actually is in our region, it's about a 200-page document with a narrative. In other regions, I think it's probably even longer, but the full, so that we call it the full TIP, and it contains information about the TIP development process, about the legislation authorizing the TIP, about all the different funding sources that are available for TIP projects, about the procedures to amend and adjust the TIP, because it's not necessarily static. If things change with projects, we do have to come back and amend it or adjust it based on the sort of the scope of the change. And that's also something that gets approved and endorsed by the FCTPO with the public engagement process. The narrative also includes all the air quality and greenhouse gas policies that must be abided by in our regional planning, and all the greenhouse gas impacts of all the all the projects listed in the TIP, and then the appendices of all the documents that were used in the development of the TIP, including any comments received. So these are just the two sort of pages of the table of contents. There's another content page of all the tables and graphs and charts that are in that several hundred page document that someone produces each year. So as I said, I'll just briefly touch on transit projects. So there's the narrative, and the narrative contains the highway project list and the transit project list. The highway projects lists are any projects that are road transportation projects, roadway and bridge projects, anything that sort of gets administered through MassDOT. The transit project list in our region is different. As I said, the TIP is required. Any projects receiving federal funds are required to be listed in the TIP. The transit agency in our region is the Franklin Regional Transit Authority, the FRTA, and they, because of their size, get very little federal funds. Most of their funding comes from the state. So the FRTA coordinates with MassDOT's transit division, developing a list of projects within a fiscally constrained framework as well. But they develop those projects. They do get reviewed and endorsed by the FCTPO, but the FERCOG staff and our municipal partners don't really have a lot of input into that. We do have the input that we during that public comment period, and we can address any questions or concerns you have to the FRTA, but we're going to focus today on the highway projects, obviously. So as I think I said, yeah, the TIP is fiscally constrained, which means that all projects must have a source of funding identified. That source of funding is going to be one of several federal transportation funding programs. The TIP is divided into several sections. Section 1A is for regionally prioritized federal aid projects. There's also a section there for any projects that have an earmark or a discretionary grant that includes federal funds. They would also be listed in section 1A of the TIP, or in section 1 of the TIP. Section 2 is state prioritized projects. And so these can be road projects, but this is really where a lot of bridge projects are. Most, as I think we all know, most bridges in the state are owned by and owned and maintained by MassDOT. And so they are responsible for prioritizing any repairs or replacements or maintenance of bridges that are under their jurisdiction. And so those projects are listed in section 2. Section 3 is any projects that are happening in our region that are non-federal aid, but they're significant projects and we want to sort of see them as part of the program. So there'll be projects that will be in the CIP. And as I said, there are multiple federal funding programs available. There's a whole bunch of acronyms here. You may hear me use some other acronyms, and if I do, please call me out if I don't spell them out. But so these are just the different sort of buckets of funding that Federal Highway has identified to sort of emphasize different priority areas. So the most common one that we will use in section 1 is STBG, that's Surface Transportation Block Grants. There's also CMAQ for congestion mitigation and air quality. These are projects that are intended to improve air quality by reducing congestion or other means. There's HSIP, which is the Highway Safety Improvement Program. This is a portion of funds that is intended for safety improvements. And we can talk a little bit more, I think maybe in part 2, about what makes up an HSIP project. And there's NHPP, National Highway Performance Program. These are improvements on roadways that are part of the National Highway System. And a brief sidetrack there, the National Highway System is the network of designated roadways that are designated as major important roadways in a network. And so they're going to be most of your state numbered routes, all your interstates, most of your state numbered routes, and a couple of other major roadways. So it's not all the numbered routes, but all the major ones, and then some major roads that aren't numbered. And federal funding legislation requires that the federal funds are matched by in-kind contribution from another entity. For almost all TIP projects, that match comes from the state, and the funding split is typically 80-20. So when you look closely at the TIP, you'll see that project cost is split up to federal funds and non-federal funds. And in the TIP, almost all the non-federal funds are MassDOT funds, and they are 80% of the total project is going to be funded by federal funds, and the other 20% is funded by the match, which usually comes from the state, although there are some exceptions. So as I said, just going back up to the section 1 again, this is regionally prioritized projects. This is what we call the target section of the TIP. As funds are dispersed to MassDOT, and MassDOT divides up the big pile of funds that they get from federal highway, divides it up for each of the planning regions to have a regionally prioritized section of their TIP. And they give them a target dollar amount for each of the 5 years in the 5-year TIP. That funding is dispersed and divided up based on the MARPA formula, which looks at each of those planning regions and the population and the road miles in each region. And so then we get a portion of that. And so for FERCOG, our targets in the current TIP, the one that's out right now that covers 2023 through 2027, our targets are about $6.7 million in FY 2023, and increasing a little bit through the end to $7.8 million in federal fiscal year 2027. But we have received word from MassDOT, the targets are going to be increasing in the further out years. And so in the TIP that we will be developing soon, the targets for 2027 and 2028 are increasing to $9.2 million in 2027 and $9.3 million available for transportation, regionally prioritized transportation programs in Franklin County in 2028. So that's great news. But I think a lot of that is going to get absorbed by inflation. Anyway, so that's what the TIP is. That's what the highway TIP looks like. And I've alluded to this so far. How is it developed? Right? So this is a calendar that MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning created that I'm sort of going to crib and add on a little bit to here. But so, as I said, this is an annual process. It's sort of an ongoing process. So starting in December, MassDOT conducts the financial planning and cost estimation. So they look at their federal allocations for the year, and they crunch the numbers and do the division and give us the targets for our regional prioritized projects. And then so that sort of happens in December. And in January, MassDOT and the RPAs reach out to proponents that have projects listed in the current TIP, the active TIP, and get status updates to make sure that those projects are moving along in the TIP process, as we're going to talk about. And that financial guidance, those targets are distributed to the MPO and the FCTPO and the RPAs in January. So we got those just a couple weeks ago. So that's sort of the background of getting ready. We're getting information about the current projects and seeing where they are in their design and readiness. And so in February, the beginning of February, MassDOT divisions and the MBTA conduct readiness days. And so this is actually a 2-day event that MassDOT organizers, where each highway district and each regional planning agency gets a set time over one of those 2 days to meet with all the divisions of MassDOT Project Development who are engage with project development at MassDOT and meet and discuss the upcoming TIP. And so that's a really important day where we sort of assess the projects and see if they are going to be successful at completing project development in the year that they have been programmed in the TIP. And also in February, MassDOT program managers sort of come up with a draft of project selection, and that is particularly for this statewide project. So those are projects that are getting state funds. Those are the Section 2 projects that the region will just get informed that these are the projects that MassDOT wants us to list in Section 2 of the TIP. And so in March, the MPOs and the FCTPO conduct our TIP development meeting. So at our regular meeting, actually, we'll have a regular meeting at the end of February. We'll probably start this about the outcome of Readiness Day and what we have planned for developing the next TIP. And we'll give more information at our meeting at the end of March. And by the end of March, we should have developed our preferred project list for the upcoming TIP. And I'll get a little bit more into that on the next slide. So we have a preferred project list in March, and then in April, MassDOT sort of conducts quality assurance, quality control on the funding sources and their intended uses, and make sure that everything lines up and is going to proceed according to federal rules and regulations. They start preparing the CIP and the STIP document at the same time. The TPO or the FERCOG is developing the TIP document, that long narrative document. And at our meeting, the TPO meeting at the end of April, we intend to release a draft TIP for public comment. So the TIP should be complete there. It should be in the form that we believe is complete. We'll release it to the public for that 21-day comment period. And then any comments that are received, we will amend and edit the narrative and revise the highway in consultation with the TPO and MassDOT, revise the TIP as necessary per public comment. So once those public comments are received between the end of April and through May, MassDOT boards approve the draft CIP and the draft STIP, and there's that public engagement portion that I said. And then at our meeting at the end of May is typically when the FCTPO endorses the TIP, and that is those members of that nine-member body vote say yes to the TIP. And then that TIP gets transmitted to MassDOT to be incorporated into this STIP. And MassDOT runs the final fiscal constraint analysis, make sure all their ducks are in a row. The MassDOT board approves the final CIP and the STIP. And then the STIP, because it's federally required document, it gets sent to several federal agencies for them to review and approve. And all those approvals need to be in place before the end of the federal fiscal year. I've alluded to it already, but so the TIP is renewed annually, and that annual schedule is based on the federal fiscal year, which starts each October 1st. And so all projects that end up listed in the first year of the TIP, the first year of that 5-year program, that means that those projects must be advertised before the end of that federal fiscal year. So a project that is currently in the 2023 TIP must be advertised before the end of the federal fiscal year 2023, which ends at the end of this September. But in practice, MassDOT prefers to schedule projects to be advertised in the third quarter of the federal fiscal year in which they're listed, to avoid any unforeseen sort of problems that might come up, and sort of reserve the fourth quarter for other activities. And so when, as we'll get into, when we develop a municipal project, to have that in mind whenever it does get listed in the TIP, that the advertising for construction will typically happen sometime before the fourth quarter of the fiscal year in which it's listed. So the TIP is on an annual calendar, but it's a federal fiscal calendar. It's not the state fiscal calendar or the calendar calendar. So that, let me talk a little bit more then about how we program the regional TIP. And when I say programming the TIP, we're really talking about that regional prioritized target project section. That's section 1A. We receive and share comments that we get on projects that are in section 2, but the TPO does not have discretion over when those projects are listed. That comes from MassDOT. So as I said, we look as we start after Readiness Day, we start looking at developing the next TIP, and part of that is, each year the first year of the TIP has elapsed, and there's going to be a new year at the end of that 5-year period. And so we are looking at the projects that are currently listed, but also looking at projects that haven't been listed or programmed yet, and evaluating which one is going to be listed in the furthest out year of the TIP. And so that is what we call the universe of projects. The universe of projects is all projects that are in the current TIP and all projects that are eligible for the TIP but have yet to be listed. And as I mentioned before, so the things that we look at, these are what the things that we're considering when we develop that highway list for the TIP. One of them is the targets. That's really the most important one, especially because it seems like a lot of money, but it in terms of transportation projects, at $7.7 million is it could go pretty fast. So we look at the cost of the projects that are currently programmed. Has that cost increased? Does it still fit within that target? And we look at when we're looking at the out year, the furthest out year of the TIP, we're looking at all the potential projects and what are their costs and how they can fit. Are they going to fit it? Another really crucial part is project readiness. And that means, is this project going to be ready to advertise in the fiscal year in which it's listed? Is there enough time? Is the project design and going, is there enough time to complete the project design and all the permitting and all the right-of-way activity that has to happen in order to get advertised? And when we're talking about the 5-year out projects, this is, we want to see that a town or the proponent of a project is prepared to make sure that it progresses and becomes ready for advertising when its fiscal year approaches. But we also, this is really crucial when we look at currently programmed projects. Are they progressing through the project development process, and are they going to be ready for their scheduled advertising date? That's something that we reassess every year at Project Readiness Day with MassDOT and all their project divisions. We also look at regional equity, which is to mean, has the proponent of this project, which is typically a town, have they had a lot of TIP projects in a row, and are there other towns that maybe haven't had a project on the TIP in several years? It's sort of this is actually part of the narrative document. It's keeping track of how many projects have been advertised, have been programmed in the TIP and advertised in each town in Franklin County, and what the dollar amount of TIP resources have been applied to each town, and just sort of to try to keep some sense of regional equity. But there are a lot of things to keep track of, and really it's that the project cost and the project readiness really drive the programming in our region. But the fourth aspect of evaluating projects for suitability for the TIP are our transportation evaluation criteria. This is also part of the mandated process that projects need to be evaluated to see how much they are in line with our regional and state priorities of system maintenance, of safety, of climate resilience, of economic development, and of context sensitivity. And so as projects are approved by MassDOT, I'll get into this a little bit later, but as they are approved, they are presented to the FERCOG and the FCTPO are informed, and we evaluate each project according to the transportation evaluation criteria that the FCTPO has accepted in cooperation with MassDOT. And that's actually one of the topics that that we're going to be discussing in part 2. So I'm not going to get too deep into the transportation evaluation criteria here. But MassDOT or FERCOG is informed, as I said, when projects are approved by MassDOT, and we add them to the project universe to be considered the next time we begin to develop the TIP. So Beth, this is another spot where we could stop for questions, if we see any. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. So that brings us to what I think a lot of you are here for, municipal project development. How do you know if a project is appropriate for the TIP? And if it is, then what do you do? So the crucial part here is project identification. How do you identify a TIP project? So, and that starts with project need. You have some kind of need to maintain or improve part of your local transportation network, your roads, or maybe your bridges. And that project need can be identified, come from many sources. Your DPW or highway department can let your town select board know that we have a problem here. This road is failing, it's crumbling. We keep patching the potholes and they keep popping up, and we think this road needs reconstruction. You could have a local safety concern. Maybe there's an intersection that you address it with stop signs or something else, and maybe that's not doing the trick, and there's still safety issues that can't be addressed, that haven't been solved by sort of the low cost things that you can do on your own as a DPW. It maybe requires, like, the intersection needs to be fully reconstructed, or maybe it needs a traffic signal or even a roundabout. So you have a safety concern that would make for a good TIP project. Another source of identifying a project need is a local sort of plans or studies. The town master plan shows that, we need a lot more roadway capacity in this section of town because there's a lot of development happening here, or you've participated in complete streets in the complete streets program, and you've identified that you have a really great mobility improvement project, but it's just beyond the scope of the size of the complete streets program, and the project is going to cost more than that program can provide. So maybe this will make a good TIP project. So once you realize that you have a project need, we need to decide, is this project eligible for the TIP? Because there are eligibility requirements. Not every roadway is eligible for a TIP project. And in our rural region, that can be the first stopping point. Like that'll just be it. And so a big portion of TIP eligibility is based on roadway functional classification. So all roads have been assigned a functional classification, which identifies sort of where they fit in sort of the hierarchy, the importance of each road in the network. And that's primarily driven by it can primarily be seen by the volume of traffic on each road. It also has to do with sort of the connectivity, as this road connects, the center of town to the interstate or to Route 2 or one of the major highways. And so it's an important collector road that carries traffic from a local road to an arterial road or an interstate road. And so each road has a defined functional classification, and only roads that are urban collectors or rural arterial or primary collector roads or arterial roads are eligible for the TIP. And because a lot of the roadways in Franklin County are classified as rural, if it's a rural minor collector, it's not eligible for most TIP funding programs. So really it's the major roads in most of our towns that would be eligible for the project, but our smaller local roads are not eligible for most of the TIP. There are some exceptions for some safety projects, and if you think you might have an exception, definitely let us know. We can talk about it, but in general speaking, it's that functional classification that drives that eligibility. And there's a lot of different ways that you can check what the functional classification of a roadway is in your town. The quickest way for some of you is to just shoot me a call or an email and I'll let you know. But there are online tools that MassDOT has developed that show a ton of information about all of the roadways in this state, and functional classification is just one of those. And we also provide a map. I think it's been a minute since we updated those functional classification maps that are sent out to all towns. And so if you would like an updated map of the functional classification of roads in your town, let me or Beth know and we'll get that to you. And also jurisdiction, whoever is the owner of the road is only the owner of a road is capable of being the proponent of a TIP project. So the proponent is the instigator and the steward of a TIP projects. And so, as I'm sure y'all know, some of the roads in town, most of the roads in most of our towns are under local jurisdiction. They're under the jurisdiction of the town, but there are some that are parts of most of the numbered routes are under MassDOT's jurisdiction. Some roads are under other jurisdiction, maybe DCR, but there's not a ton of those in Franklin County. Most roads are either private, in which case they're not eligible for the TIP, or they're public and they are under the jurisdiction of the town or the state. Roads that are under MassDOT's jurisdiction, they are the proponent of any potential TIP projects on those roadways. And so it's only those roads that are under your jurisdiction that are eligible for a municipal TIP project. Okay, so you have a project need on a road that is on a functionally classified road that's eligible for the TIP and it's under your jurisdiction. So, okay, this could be a TIP project. Next is, okay, so what is the scope of this project? What all are the activities that are going to be involved in the constructing this project and making these improvements, and what is that all going to cost? So the scope is, or is it just, resurfacing a mile of road, or is it, we're going to need full depth reconstruction of this road? And if we do that, what is the drainage situation like? Is this an opportunity? Is there a drainage need? Is this an opportunity to upgrade the drainage? And if there's drainage, perhaps there's going to be impact to curbs. Is there sidewalk? Is there a need for sidewalk? What is the scope? Where does the project start? Where does it end? There's a lot of things to consider there. And then those all contribute to the cost, which is really the primary problem that we're all addressing when we're talking about transportation projects. So you may need assistance from a consultant. You may need a little bit of preliminary input from an engineer or designer, or project designer, to help you develop that scope to make sure you're not missing anything, and then even come up with a preliminary cost estimate. FERCOG can help you with that as well. We can do some preliminary cost estimating, and it's never hurts to reach out to us and get some input in our experience. And MassDOT can also help you here too. Reach out to the highway district if you think you have a project need. They will definitely come out and advise you on this scope and whether or not this is going to be has the potential to be a successful TIP project. Okay, so once you have developed your scope and come up with your very preliminary costs, then you have to take stock of what your local investment is going to be if you do pursue a transportation improvement as a TIP project. So there's the design cost. The funds in section 1 of the TIP are typically only for the construction, and the municipality or the proponent is responsible for the cost of designing the project. MassDOT sort of considers this as sort of like the local match. It's like a soft match. It's sort of like, this is your investment in the project. There are rules of thumb for how much a design is going to cost. You can definitely get quotes from consultants. But once you have a sense of the size of your project, what the potential construction cost is going to be, a good rule of thumb is that the design is about 10% of the design cost is about 10% of the project cost. That may be changing a little bit with the construction prices escalating a lot right now, but that's sort of the rule of thumb that still sort of guides us. And then there's the project complexity, and I'm not talking here about the construction aspects, the drainage and curb or utilities or anything like that, but like all the impacts of the project, the environmental impacts. It may require a lot of environmental permitting, and the right-of-way impacts. Right-of-way is a huge part of project development. So all projects on the TIP must have a secure right-of-way, and that includes not just any permanent takings that might be required for a roadway expansion, but also easements, either permanent easements for a sidewalk or necessary drainage, or temporary easements for construction. Every little piece of that right away must be identified and signed off on before a project can be implemented. And depending on the scope of the project, how many different parcels it impacts, that right away can get pretty complicated. And then there's the oversight that the town is going to need to invest. There will definitely be an engineering consultant who handles, the design and a lot of the permitting, and but it's up to you as the proponent of the project to have oversight over that consultant. And again, depending on how complex the project is and how many pieces are required for each submittal, it's important to keep in steady contact with your consultant as the project progresses. And that takes time. You're kind of managing your consultant and staying engaged with them. And so that takes, the resources from the town in terms of time. And then the last thing to consider, one of the last things to consider is the time frame. So as I said, the TIP is a 5-year program. And so typically from initiation to advertisement, the time frame for our TIP project is a minimum of 5 years. So if you're lucky and you get into the project universe and because it's tech scoring, you rated high, and because of the project cost, you're going to fit right in, you could get into the TIP and pass all the way through it within 5 years. There is often a little bit more time involved where you're sort of waiting in that waiting list, and that on the waiting list that is part of the universe of projects. And so depending on the urgency of your project need, is that long time frame going to work for you? So keep that in mind. And also, it's not on the slide here, and we're going to talk about it a little bit at the end, but consider, and I'm sure you would, is there an alternative source of funds for this? Because as I've already talked about, the TIP is kind of complex, and it's, as we get through it, it's going to, following the MassDOT project development process is more complex than using some of other available funding sources for your project. And so if the size of the project is large enough and it's going to exceed, any other resources that you can identify, and the need is, you can maintain your facility for the 5+ years that it's going to take for a TIP project to develop, then okay, let's talk TIP. And then, you reach out to your MassDOT district or myself or Beth there at FERCOG, and we can start to talk about how to take the next steps, which are shown on the slide here, which I have basically borrowed from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning, revised it a little bit, mostly with our new logo. So this shows all those super easy, quick little steps to get through to get a project from project need to advertising. But no, it's a real interactive process here, and you're in the middle as the project proponent. So I'll quickly go through here of these steps. So, okay, and how you get into this project development system with MassDOT. So you communicate to your MassDOT district that you have a project need. In the past, they had a project need form that you would send them by mail, and then you could email it. And now there's a web app for that. It's called Map It, Massachusetts Project Intake Tool. And we have resources. I hopefully you've seen this already, but I'll have links to how to get to Map It there. So that's how you get in the queue with your project need. And as I said, the need could have come from the MPO or planning study that was conducted by the FERCOG under our Unified Planning Work Program, or it could come, as I said, from your local knowledge. And this is where, even before you start plugging things into Map It, that's a good time to reach out to us, the FERCOG, and at your MassDOT district to say, look, I have this project. I think I'm going to put it in Map It. And say, yeah. That is a good fit for Map It, or no, maybe consider some other sources first. Maybe that's not the best fit for the TIP. And so that's that guidance that the district can provide for you with project planning. So you get all the information. So we put projects into Map It, but the start of the project, the end of the project, it is integrated with the GIS system. So it shows sort of all the sort of mapping elements that underlie the roadway network, you know, where wetlands, where rivers, there's already protected land, what land here, what functional classification of the road you're talking about is, just a ton of information that Map-It pulls together. And so it's actually, it's a step-by-step process that I think we'll talk about more in part two. But the first step of that is the project need form, the sort of the intake. And then, so you've done some project planning and then sort of the scoping. So MassDOT and the district have reviewed the project need form and sort of approved it, like, yeah, this seems like it's a fit for a MassDOT project. Can submit us some more information, project scoping information into Map-It, and then that gets transmitted to the MassDOT Project Review Committee. And they assess the project and say, yes, this fits into the guidelines that we have set for what constitutes a potential TIP project. And they go ahead and look at that information and approve a project. Within that is also a scoring that's similar to the transportation evaluation criteria. The MassDOT has a project selection advisory committee that scores their projects to see like how many of sort of the priority areas this project is making improvements in. So yeah, so that is project scoping. And so, okay, yeah, you're approved. So MassDOT says, yeah, this is a great sort of project. This is a potential TIP project. MassDOT approves it, and they assign a project ID number and a project manager in Boston, the highway division in Boston, once the project is approved. FERCOG gets notified when a project is approved, and then we'll add it to our project universe, and at the appropriate time, we'll do that transportation evaluation criteria scoring. And yes, it's added to our project universe. The MassDOT project manager is the one who's going to coordinate all your design submittals and coordinate with your consultant and all the internal sections at MassDOT that needs to review each design submittal. So that's sort of step 4 has begun, and at the same time, step 5 is funding, and that's the TIP. Basically, you've gotten into the universe of projects, and then at the beginning of the year we start doing reassessing with each TIP, and that's when we start talking about adding new projects to the TIP. Project is under design submittals, MassDOT reviews, gives their comments to the consultant revises the design. You go back and forth like that for a little while until the project design is complete. And it's ready for advertising, hopefully in the same year that it has become listed in the TIP. As I said before, MassDOT is the match for federal funds for projects that have been selected for regional funding by the TPO. The project design is complete, and MassDOT is going to advertise it for construction. Actually, let me just move on to the next slide. Actually, let me stay here for a minute. MassDOT is going to advertise it for construction, and they sort of take it over from there. Once the design is complete, MassDOT takes it over. They prepare the construction contracts and they supervise the construction as well. So even though I wanted to mention here that even though the TIP is developed on an annual cycle, there's no timeline or deadline for initiating a project. You can initiate a project anytime, all year long. It's just that the TIP sort of gets reassessed at the beginning of the year and endorsed in May. So that's for the programming, but the design can be implemented. You can initiate a project and begin the design at any time throughout the year. And actually, the sooner you identify a project need and get it underway, the better. So just a little bit more about your project design, project development on the municipal side. So what do you have to do once a project has been approved and it's eligible for the TIP and you're ready to design it according to all of the standards and regulations that MassDOT requires. So you got to get prepared by engaging with an engineering consultant. You need to contract with a pre-qualified engineering designer. MassDOT has a list of engineers that have been pre-qualified and shown that they are capable of meeting all the benchmarks that MassDOT has laid out and designing to the standards, to MassDOT and federal highway standards. And that consultant is going to have to provide you and MassDOT with a scope of work hours. This is all the work that the project is going to take, and this is the scope, and this is what it's going to cost the town. And that scope is actually approved by MassDOT. There's also a design schedule, a Gantt chart showing all of the design submittal, all of the required design submittals and all the pieces of each submittal and when each is intended to be accomplished, with the advertising date as out here to show that you're going to be able to, the designer is going to be able to accomplish the task within the time allotted. And that design includes, and that the project development includes not just the design, where the design consists of the plans, the construction specifications, any necessary design reports on projects, particularly capacity increases or traffic signals or traffic pattern changes require a functional design report, and the cost estimate for all the construction costs. So in addition to the design, there's also the required environmental permitting and the right-of-way activities. And so these are the things that you're going to be working with the consultant on. So your consultant will be the one who's primarily in communication with the project manager at MassDOT, but you want to be aware of all of the submittals that they have planned. You want to be sort of really engaged with that design schedule and making sure that your consultant is staying on track and responding to MassDOT's inquiries as needed, and making sure that that communication is happening, because it's your project, it's your money that's being spent on this contract, and then it's your project that you're trying to get implemented through the TIP. And so it's really crucial that you have that good engagement with your design consultant. Once a project is approved by MassDOT, the proponent will get a letter with a long list of all the project development requirements and all the checklists that need to be completed to make sure that you're covering all of the aspects of project development that MassDOT requires. And so that whole process is laid out by MassDOT in the project, primarily in the project development and design guide. You see an image of the cover here. This was developed, it was one of the first in the nation. It was really innovative to actually get all this information, like how do we get a project from need to implementation, and what are all the requirements that we have, all into one guide. This was developed by when it was the Mass Highway Department in 2006, before we started saying 20, in 2006. So a lot of things have changed. And so this guide has been continually sort of updated and adapted with engineering directives. And so this is where you would start, but there are a lot of additional changes, things that have changed since this guide was published in 2006. I know that MassDOT is working on an update that should be coming out pretty soon. So the next slide is going to show just a really short little list of all the simple steps in design submittal. Each one of these is a lot of things. Each design phase has multiple components, and this is just an overview. I'm going to share a link at the end to a page with all the project development sort of engineering directives and specs and checklists that are required. But these are the phases of design I'll talk about quickly. Pre-25, preliminary engineering. So this is scoping. Depending on the complexity of the project, you may have a meeting with your MassDOT district and maybe some sections of the Highway Division in Boston to sort of go over the scope of the project and make sure that you're considering everything. For some projects that are on a accelerated time frame, or again have more complexity, there may be what they call a 10% sort of over the shoulder meeting where MassDOT representatives get together with the town and your consultant to make sure that you're all on the same page about what's going to be required in the next design submittal. But the first big submittal is the 25% design, and this is where you really fleshed out the scope of your project. If there's any deviation from MassDOT standards for roadway width or sidewalk width or other aspects of construction, if you want to have any sort of deviation from that, that's often feasible, but there needs to be a justification for it. They have what they call the design justification workbook. This is one of the things that may be required in the 25% design. At this under 25%, you would have identified all the potential right away. You're going to have an early environmental checklist and sort of all the environmental permits that may or may not be required for your project, a checklist to make sure you're going to get all that done. And preliminary plans will be developed, and there should be a 25% design hearing for any projects that have right-of-way impacts, any right-of-way impacts at all. As I said, temporary construction easements are right-of-way impacts, which will require a design public hearing, which is an opportunity for abutters to the project and any other members of the public to share their concerns about the project and scope, and maybe make suggestions for additional improvements that can be included. So that happens after 25% design has been submitted and approved by MassDOT. There's a hearing. After that hearing, consultants would go back and incorporate any comments received and proceed to the 75% design. So this is where the design has been finalized. Like there's not going to be any changes like this sidewalk, is it going to be 4 feet, is it going to be 5 feet, is it going to be 6 feet? We decided this is a 5-foot sidewalk and all the plans are going to follow that. So design is finalized. All the initial versions of construction plans have been completed. All your permitting, it may not be in place, but you've submitted all your permit applications. Permitting has begun, and you have right-of-way plans that are close to their final design that gets submitted to MassDOT for their review and approval. Like, yep, this is all the right of way. This is all the right of way you have to secure. So that's sort of 75%. And then 100% is developing the final construction plans, the final right of way plans, finalizing the cost estimate. The cost estimate should be updated at each of the design phases. So the TPO can keep track of it and make sure it's still fitting in the tip. But the estimate should be finalized in the 100% design. And finally, all those documents, the plans, the specifications for the materials and the methods that will be used in the project, and that final estimate will get compiled in the PS&E submittal. They always say PS&E, it stands for Plan Specifications and Estimates. And that's just all those documents that are responsibility of the proponent to prepare, have all been prepared and approved by MassDOT and compiled into a single submittal. Some of these phases for simpler projects can be combined. So you'll see that your project manager may, at the beginning of the project development, will say, like, we're going to do you can do a 7,500% submittal and just, submit all your final construction plans and have all the permitting started and the right-of-way plans all as one submittal. Sometimes it's 100% and PS&E phases that are combined, because 75% went so smoothly, everything looked pretty good, just put it all together in the final PS&E form. So that was a quickie on the design submittals. There's a lot more to each of them, but yeah, you did that. You've complied, you've done all your submittals, your PS&E submission has been accepted. Yeah, you get to go to construction. So depending on what time of year it is and what the MassDOT's advertising schedule is like, your project will be advertised within the quarter, a fiscal year quarter. And MassDOT really does take over from there. They take the PS&E documents and combine them with draft with their specs and other requirement documentation for a bid package. And that bid is advertised by MassDOT, and the bids are opened and evaluated by MassDOT. And they assess the bids. They go with the lowest qualified bidder, typically. You guys know how that works. And then a contract is awarded. MassDOT initiates and executes a contract, or possibly multiple contracts if there's going to be subcontractors involved with the project. Once the contract is in place, the contractor is issued a notice to proceed. You guys take it from here. Contractors take over from MassDOT now. You guys go. And the contractor will arrange a pre-construction meeting with any MassDOT field people who are going to need to be there. So the MassDOT District Construction Office, their field engineers, your local DPW representatives who are going to participate or assist, in any local work that needs to be done, fire and police that may need to be involved in traffic control or detours. You all get together for a pre-construction meeting, like this is how the construction is going to go. Then it's not really up to the contractor to decide to define the construction timeline. And so that's when they share the sort of the construction schedule. And then, all right, construction usually starts in the spring. And that is also sort of taken care of by MassDOT. They handle the field engineering and the inspection and the payments to the contractor. So yeah, there you go. You did it. You initiated a TIP project. Yeah, so if we have any questions, I'll take them now, but this is really the final section. And these are just sort of some tips and resources for you as you develop a TIP project. So I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm just going to dive into the tips. I borrowed this from the Central Transportation Planning staff, CTPS, which is the staff to the Boston MPO. They do a lot of great work, and they had this really simple little list of like advice of stewarding a TIP project as a proponent. And I just, rather than reinvent the wheel, I'll just share their advice with you, which is that time is of the essence. As I said, this is a real long time frame, and so the sooner you could get started, the better, because it is going to take a while. And as I mentioned so many times, to communicate early and often, consult with the FERCOG staff and keep us informed, because we can really help you keep on track with your TIP program and making sure that you're going to be advertising your project in the allocated fiscal year. And also, as I said, checking in regularly with your MassDOT district and your project manager in Boston, and make sure, if there's anything, making sure that you're getting good communication with them and with your consultant, which brings me to the next one, keeping track of your project. This is what I'm saying. If there are any, delays in submissions for any reason that can jeopardize your readiness, that could jeopardize your position on the TIP. And also keeping track of your project cost. As the project cost increasing and did the scope sort of, start to mushroom and things start to get added, maybe based on comments or based on things that were unforeseen in the preliminary engineering, has your project cost sort of exceeded the ballpark of the target of your TIP year, that can jeopardize your placement on the TIP. You may have to bump back if you've exceeded the available target funds. And as I said so many times, advance your project design early and often and be ready for the unforeseen. Not just because it's a long process, but because if you are continually meeting all your submission deadlines and you're really advancing your project and it's moving along well, you may be in a position to move forward where another project on the TIP maybe has delays or cost increases, and they're not going to be ready for their advertising year. I've definitely seen it happen where if your project is progressing, you could leap over another project that's not progressing. And so that's just another really important reason why it's really crucial to keep in good communication with your project manager and your consultant. So I mentioned before, the TIP has a lot of requirements that maybe are not a good fit for your project need. And so you probably are aware of this, but these are some of the alternative sources for TIP funding in Massachusetts. These are all state programs that they have their own eligibility requirements, but because they don't involve direct disbursement of federal funds, they have different design requirements. And so do not sort of require all this 25%, 75, 100% PS&E submittals. It's a much sort of simpler design process. And so there's MassWorks and the Small Town and Rural Assistance Program. There's the Complete Streets Program for mobility improvements, bicycle, pedestrian transit, even some traffic safety. There's the Shared Streets and Spaces Program for sort of small transportation improvements. There's the Safe Routes to School program for improvements, particularly for mobility within the vicinity of a local school. There's the Municipal Pavement program, which provides which provides pavement preservation projects for state numbered routes and projects on the national highway system, the NHS. So most locals are not eligible, but if you have a numbered road, it's worth looking into, because this is a newer program that has been really helpful with some towns, with just resurfacing or basic pavement preservation projects. There's the small bridge program for municipally owned bridges that are between 10 and 20 feet long. And then there is the municipal culvert replacement program for small culvert replacements. So these are all their own. These programs all have their own, as I said, requirements and submission deadlines. We at the FERCOG would be very happy to help you pursue any of these programs as well. And we can talk about that if that's your project need. So here are just some resources, some links to MassDOT's information and tools from MassDOT. So the first one is the project development tool. So this is where the project design guide is, and all the checklists and all the modifications and engineering directives that supersede some of the requirements in that 2006 project design guide. So your consultant should definitely be aware of all these tools, but it's be great to inform yourself as well of what all those things are. And when it comes to initiating a project, here is where you do it. MassDOT Highway initiating a project. This includes a link to map it, which does require a login information. So you have to have created an account, but that's very simple to request an account from MassDOT if you don't already have it. And this is where you can start getting your project information input into map it. And then there's MassDOT.geo.local. This is a really great resource, actually, and I want to spend some time on this in part 2 if we don't have time after the discussion today. With a lot of the information I just shared about funding, and also all that sort of GIS information about projects, or about the roadway and what and the surrounding environment. All those mapping layers are available in there, and also it's a hub for applications to several of those other MassDOT funding programs. I think Complete Streets, it'll link you to Complete Streets, Shared Streets and Spaces, and I think the Municipal Pavement Program are under that umbrella as well. And then finally, here are your contacts. You should know which MassDOT Highway Division district you are in. If you don't, let me know. It's very easy to find out. District 1, the District Project Development Engineer, Mark Moore, and Peter Fieri, the District Planning Engineer. Here's their contact information. In District 2, they have a great team as well, with Paula Simmons, the District Project Development Engineer, and Laura Hansen, their District Projects Engineer. Be very happy to help you discuss your project need. And here at the FERCOG, there's our Transportation Program Manager, Beth Giannini, and myself. We'd be very glad to talk to you about any questions that you have about the TIP or any other project needs that you might have. Which brings me to discussion. That's it. I hope I didn't go too fast. I hope that was informative, and I really hope that if there's any questions or any sort of information or experience that you have with the TIP that you'd want to share, now is the time. I'm going to stop my sharing here.
Thank you, Lori. Wow. That was great. That was very comprehensive. I just want to mention, as Lori said, because I know just listening to that, there's a lot to it. But don't feel free at any time to reach out to us, because we're always here to help. So we're help navigate or send you in the right direction. So so we are happy to help. I don't know if does anyone have any questions? I'm just checking if there's any raised hands. I don't see any right now. I might just throw maybe a little question out there just to start, kind of going back to the first section of the presentation that talked more about the about the planning and just kind of like for the towns, just generally, I know a lot of our towns are involved, but maybe just how can a town get involved in the TPO process? I know some of the towns have, representatives that are on the TPO as the like regional representatives, but just generally for a town that's not usually involved, but wanted to get involved a little bit, like maybe Lori, can you just mention like what would be where can they kind of get involved in the process?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, the TPO meetings are all open to the public. So anybody is welcome to attend. They are posted. Their meeting times are posted on the FERCOG.org website. But we have a standing meeting on the fourth Thursday of every month. But that is as needed. So if we don't have any agenda items, sort of towards the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, we may be able to skip one because we've done all that tip work. But typically we meet every month. And so, yeah, so you're welcome to attend any of those meetings. That's a great way to start. There's always an opportunity for public comment on the agenda at every FCTPO meeting. You can reach out to your regionally appointed representative for your sub-region. If you're in West County, that's Heather Butler, who's the town administrator for Buckland. She's the West County FCTPO member. Central County, that would be Steve Ellis of Montague. And in East County, that would be Gabe Volker, who's the town administrator for Orange. And so if you have sort of questions about what the TPO is up to, that's someone you could contact. Or you could, I guess, as we said, you can reach out to me or to Beth. We staff the FCTPO and are always sharing information between ourselves with the TPO, and sort of always looking for good topics to discuss there too. So that would be where that's how you get involved. And then if you want to join the FCTPO, we could talk about that as well. Actually, Beth, I'm not sure how, I think it's a 3-year appointment for each of the regionally elected members.
Yeah, I have to admit I'm not positive, but we'll have to check on that. But yeah, if somebody had some interest, is definitely like reach out to us and we can check in on kind of shifting up or the membership. So I'm getting an alert from from Amanda saying that our time is almost up. So I don't know if there's I don't see any questions in the chat. Hopefully everyone got a lot of information. And one thing I would just mention is for the next meeting, if you do have questions that you didn't think of right away, but you'd love to get information on or further information, please do reach out to us as we prepare and help MassDOT to prepare for the second part of these workshops. Let us know, and we can we can kind of get that question put out right early on and get some information. So and the slides, let's see. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. The slides and recording will go out later this week. So we will be sending the slides and the recording out in case you need to go back and check on a section or get some further information. So, but again, I appreciate everyone joining us and looking and learning more about the tip.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, and just if there's anything that was glossed over today that you want more information about in part 2, definitely let us know. As I said, I think we'll talk about the transportation evaluation criteria, and our partners from MassDOT District 2 will talk about MapIt project intake tool and a little bit more about project development and all those design submittals. But if there's anything in particular that you want more info on, this is the time to let us know. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Great.